Ranking Member Grassley.
I'm going to start with Dr. Jenkins. Your written testimony notes, quote, President Biden established a target to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions to half of peak levels by 2030. To reach this goal, electric vehicle sales should be making up about 50% of the light-duty vehicle market by that date, up about fivefold from today. Your testimony also recognized, quote unquote, a remarkable collapse in EV sales this year. Given the evident lack of demand for EVs, is this Biden-Harris administration goal of 5 times today's EV sales attainable by 2030?
Great questions, Senator Grassley. At this stage, I should note that's a goal. It's non-binding, and we'll see where consumers go with the products that are being offered on the market. I'll note, as I did in my oral testimony, that most of the collapse in sales, all of it really is Tesla, who is the market leader, responsible for about 45% of all plug-in vehicle sales. So if they're stumbling to sell their vehicles, it's very difficult to see the overall market expand at a pace that's consistent with that goal. But the rest of the market is becoming increasingly diversified. We're seeing strong growth in a variety of companies offering more and more products that consumers want at price points that they can afford. And we're seeing increased interest from consumers. As I mentioned, over half of consumers surveyed are interested in buying an EV within the next year. Not all of them will do so, but that indicates substantial opportunity to grow. And we're in the early stages of this transition.
Dr. Sweetheart, your written testimony states in bold, quote, if U.S. policymakers do not support the development, commercialization, and acceptance of electrified vehicles, our nation risks becoming more dependent on foreign sources for raw materials and critical minerals in the future defined by our competitors. You also note that, quote, China is manufacturing EVs on a scale equivalent to the entire manufacturing output of the auto industry in the United States. The left is holding up the environmental permitting reform necessary to mine for the domestic critical minerals, which we need to compete with China, while urging a massive EV market share expansion. It just doesn't add up. So my question, should we do more to mine for critical minerals domestically? And what specific pieces of environmental legislation should we amend to improve our mining capacity? And let me suggest before you answer that maybe a couple months ago I read about the nickel mining in Indonesia at the same time that our own government was not allowing such mining in Minnesota.
Well, Senator, thank you for those questions. I would like to underscore that, again, there's a record number of options and choices available to consumers today. As it relates to the supply chains, the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time on permitting was to start today. So we can't have permitting reform fast enough as it relates to addressing not only what the U.S. may need for future supply chain resilience, but also working with our allies and partners, knowing that obviously auto standards are set well into the future, and even if we started today with mining and extracting in the U.S., it might be 15 or more years before we may see the benefits of that extraction processing. So again, I think that underscores the critical importance. If the U.S. is to remain competitive across all vehicle platforms, that the supply chain piece is fundamental.
I think you expressed the inconsistency between environmental policies and what the same environmentalists think we ought to do for EV vehicles. Mr. Davis, as you know, the federal government highway trust fund has operated at a deficit, is currently projected by the Congressional Budget Office to become insolvent in 2028, even though the existing taxes that fund the trust fund generally adhere to user pays principle for surface transportation. The federal government has not followed the lead of at least 24 states that impose higher registration fees on EVs to compensate for lost gas revenue. Do you agree that if we want to maintain the user fee pays principle that has traditionally guided these trust fund taxes, we should ensure EVs are also paying their fair share?
Thank you, Senator. If you want to maintain the user pay, user benefit principle, then all vehicles that use the road should pay something. The question of what would the proper way be to tax EVs it depends on, first of all, if the government is going to shift away from gasoline tax to another method in general. If so, you tax EVs like you tax the rest of them on mileage or whatever. If not, the states that are doing EV registration fees, as long as they are around the ballpark average of what an internal combustion vehicle of the same size and axle weight would do on average mileage, is a sort of proxy. It's not a great proxy because it doesn't differentiate between the car that drives 3,000 a year and the car that drives 30,000 miles a year. But right now, it's about $89 a year is the average in gasoline taxes paid for a passenger car, and it's about $110 in federal fuel taxes paid for a larger SUV or pickup truck. If an annual registration fee for EVs were in that ballpark, you could honestly say that it was as close an approximation of a true user fee as it would be easy for the IRS to administer and would be consistent with the user benefit principle.
Thank you very much.